to have Bob Winship turn his camera on and mic on. Bob Winship is the strategic team coordinator at Weyerhaeuser Pembina Timberlands. He's had a long and wide variety of roles in forest industry, and his experience includes landscape scale resource management planning, silviculture, timber harvesting operations, business management, safety leadership, government policy and regulatory development, and Aboriginal relations. Bob is a leader in Alberta's forest community, and we are happy that we can benefit from his experience today. And his title is Wood Supply Perspectives on the Big Picture. Take it away, Bob. Share screen now.
All right, thanks very much, Vic. Appreciate that. All right, Vic, can you still hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, and just remind the participants, if you haven't figured already, expand your screen so you can see the presentation. Two quick disclaimers. One is the opinions expressed in this presentation are not necessarily those of my employer, Weyerhaeuser Company. Second disclaimer is, unlike a previous speaker, my presentation lacks numbers and references, and I will blame the conference organizers for only giving me 10 minutes. Jeff, I'm going to have to ask you how the heck you got 20 and I only got 10.
But before you go on, could you? I'm not seeing your share screen.
Okay. How's that? Have you got it, Vic?
Hey, Bob. Yeah, we can see it if you want to expand the screen.
All right, have folks got it?
We have not. There we go.
Good to go, Vic?
Good to go.
All right, thank you. All right, folks, sorry about that. So again, two disclaimers, and we'll start. 9 slides, we'll go fast, try and keep up. So, Alberta, the last great forestry development in Canada, starting in the late 1980s. After a horrible recession, the province was looking to diversify. And one of the tenets that made that successful was the forest tenure in Alberta called the Forest Management Agreement. It's a proposition that's worked well right up until this day. It incents an investment in forest management and an influence to an opportunity for influence in annual level cut. It also resulted in increased investment by the government in resource management protection to support that development. And again, some of the most competitive facilities and the capital we need to get them are still found in Alberta to this day. Now, in that expansion of forestry here, what you'll see typically elsewhere in Canada as well, as that wood supply goes up and the more forest management investment is made, you'll see the constant increasing too of things like research and development programs, resource assessments, all kinds of good things come along with that. And again, I emphasize the level, not the amount, but the level of knowledge and expertise comes along with that. And I want to give a shout out too to our dedicated and sometimes heroic people in fire suppression in Alberta during some catastrophic times and what they've done to try and protect that resource as well. So thank you to them. Now, where's Alberta at these days? Here's a collection of quotes, and I mean these are public quotes from different forestry leaders, be it government, industry, or R&D folks. You can see that as you scan through this, there's some not so encouraging messages coming about. Jeff talked a lot about what's happening with nature. Same thing started to happen in Alberta as well. The one that always catches my attention of late is that annual level cuts will decline by 1/3 in the next few years. So might be a good time to kind of ponder our future. The Forest Act in Alberta is currently under review. It's still being bantered about in the legislature at this time, but for the first time in legislation, you're going to see something called a preamble. And you might hear things like, well, just certain people wanted that for political reasons type of thing. But to be clear, if you talk to contract lawyers and you're going to a dispute before a judge, the preamble, or the whereas as it's called, is very important. And here's one that is going to appear in that new act. Whereas the security of access to a sustainable timber supply is the basis of the forest industry's ability to contribute to Alberta's economic prosperity. And there are others, but this one I'll bring to light and relevant today. So we are striving to do the right thing, as everyone else is in Canada, to try and capture wood supply from predominantly older forest. Some might hear the word surge cut, but again, all under a sustainable forest management policy. But when you hear about declining wood supply, it just doesn't seem to line up with a sustainable wood supply. So looking back, how do you gain wood supply? And in Alberta, when I started here in those 80s, you conduct a new forest inventory, find more trees are growing bigger. 2 is increasingly sophisticated linear problem solving models that take policy into reality through equations and try and really push policy on what is defined as sustainability. And of late is adopting some better assumptions on regenerating yields from so-called managed stands versus natural, and a commitment to monitoring those. These ideas are tending to peaking today. So of late, it's simple. Buy someone else's tenure. The last significant coniferous saw log quota that went up in the provinces quite some time ago went for $25 a cubic meter. Needless to say, the private deals these days are confidential information, but suffice to say they aren't anything less. And if you do the math, this is an awful lot of money that's adding up to acquire somebody else's tenure. So what's being done about this? The Alberta Forest Products Association generated recently this past spring an interesting report, and an innovative one, and it said that it went out and surveyed a number of respected experts on the topic and said to them on a set of questions, what do you think we should do about this particular dilemma? The report was submitted to the minister in March and had 3 broad areas of recommendations. One is there is a lot of land out there, as the previous speaker alluded to, that is growing forest that is not being managed for timber supply right now, or forest management in general, other than protection. Might be well to do so. 2, grow the forest faster. In particular, learning more about growth and yield and learn it faster. What we call enhanced forest management or intensive forest management to basically shorten the rotation age. And again, tree improvement, always your best return on investment, but we'll come back to that point. And policy improvement in particular really hasn't changed in an awful long time in light of everything that's happened in nature and our challenges there. And in particular, what we recommend is a healthy discussion on moving from a matter of constraints and regulating the bottom versus incentives to incent more investment in forest management. And again, about risk and tolerance in forest management, because we do look at things at a very long time scales. Within hours of that submission to the minister himself announced on forest wood supply in Alberta, called the 13% announcement. Suffice to say, it was a long list of ideas, some with more within the control of the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, some less so. I won't read them all to you, and it's not all that public, but the bottom line is, if you scan this, really what it says is just, I would categorize as mostly status quo. In other words, just looking for more lands, looking for more trees, more parts of trees, and just trying to look in every nook and cranny to see what we can do. Nonetheless, a respected effort by the minister, much appreciated by the forest sector. I would be remiss if I did not offer some perspectives from someone working for Weyerhaeuser, now the largest private landowner of forests in North America by a large margin. So part of our job, of course, is to try to explain the Canadian situation to our employers and make the comparisons as to why it's still a good place to make investments in forestry. So for sure, my perceptions and perspectives on Weyerhaeuser owning land is it's simply an assurance of supply. And itself, the land and the trees grown on are an investment. By the way, if you're not aware of it, the second largest landowner that I think still to this day of private held forest lands in the United States is an offshoot from Canada's Manulife Insurance Company. So it must be a good investment. Now, we try to compare that to our tenure arrangement, which says we have surface rights and an opportunity to influence annual allowable cut. But again, caution, folks, the more that starts to look like a regulation, the less it looks like an opportunity. Looking at timbers of profit, we would do well to do that. On silviculture, for sure, we all have that impression of intensively managed stands, but to be clear, that silviculture has to pay for itself on the return on the timber. The land is a separate investment in itself. Economic yield is the objective versus biological. And again, the more our reforestation efforts in Alberta look like just a regulatory requirement, the less it incents the investment. But again, if you can influence the annual allowable cut through that silviculture investment, now it starts to be comparable. And again, Weyerhaeuser has a legacy of having record of innovation, research and development, and intellectual property as an asset in forestry. The Canadian model is cooperatives and collaborations. Share it. And again, we're both environmentally certified. So I'll wrap with some thoughts to consider. Age class distribution is always the dilemma in Canada, trying to capture the benefits from an older forest before nature does. And again, previous speaker has talked about how nature is doing that right now. But remember, looking ahead to what others have experienced, it's the wave. As you go through that wave of old wood, you create the wave of young wood. After that comes the so-called wall of something. History elsewhere is going to repeat itself here in Alberta. What have we learned from others, from their experiences? We look at the great reputations of Scandinavia, US Southern Pine versus Eastern Canada, or say the Lake States aspen situation. What do we learn from those jurisdictions and that history, and what can we actually do about it right now? That would be the first challenge. I go back to that point on how to get wood supply right now by simply buying someone else's allocation. This is for a lot of dollars. It raises the question to me often, why not spend a fraction of that on silviculture and tree improvement to achieve the same? There's plenty of evidence in Alberta and elsewhere that through tree improvement and enhanced forest management, intensive management, you can increase the MAI and shorten rotations. And some good work by some of the key researchers at the University of Alberta. I want to recognize that as well. So, some suggestions or recommendations I would challenge us to. An accountability to the state of forests. We owe that to the public as a profession and as a sector. Quite often, though, it's about talking about the current growing stock we see. How often do you really see something about a forecast about what the future forests look like? I often marvel as a forester that how well we track things down to very precise geospatial references to meet something reforestation standards. And once it gets that check off, it's off. It's out of mind and it's back into the inventory somewhere. I think often of the times my generation would go what we call the fly for truth, grab a helicopter for a day and go look at some of that reforestation we did a long time ago. Just wondering how that turns out. We have the technology and ability now to monitor things on a much closer basis and look at annual allowable cut determination on almost an annual basis. Something we should think about. Another one, forest management should not just be defined by constraints and defining the bottom to protect and conserve, but it should be about incentives. And managing wood for wood supply in Canada should be about growing the next forest, not just about what rate we go through and how much of the current forest. We also need to be less risk averse. I appreciate the point that when one speculates on what is the growth of the regenerating forest, one can wait and see, well, let's wait and see in 50 years from now or 55 years from now, and then we'll be sure. We really can't afford to wait like that. And again, back to this point, what is that regenerating forest looking like? What are we learning from that, and how do we have to adjust? We can't afford to wait much longer. The last point I would say is back to the comparison of owning land. We often talk about this in Canada for many decades about intensive versus extensive forestry. I would suggest you do not have to own land in order to incent an increased investment in silviculture. As long as you have that assured link to the annual allowable cut, that will do. That is the asset. Okay, Vic, back to you, and try to rush through that to keep us on time for your benefit.